All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is your favorite warlock here, practicing necromancer. And today I want to kind of discuss with you some procedures that are funerary rites. See, a lot of people, when they get into the arts, they hear the term death rites and they think destruction, curses, hexes. But what about the history of things? What about the world's procedures and how they handle death? I mean, let's face it, it's one of the most permanent things out there that you can't fight. You cannot cure death. It is as natural as something being born. For something to live, something has to die. It is the balance of things. So I got my journal out, and I've been kind of going over this, and kind of going over some things that I thought was pretty cool. Now, when we think of death, you think necromancy, you think Nikia. Hey, chill out back there, Missy. Do not fluff me. I'll take you out for a walk in a moment. I promise. My pup is Opal, down. She's a little rambunctious at the moment, so her mama dropped her off. No. No. Naughty. Opal. Calm down. Calm down. Are you calm? Okay. So, I apologize for that. So, anyways, there are three main keys that you want to look at when you think Nikia. Burial. All right, give me just a minute. I apologize for this.
Enough. Enough. You're working yourself up, Missy. So, anyways, I apologize. She has been wound up like a 10-day clock because we're getting our first snowstorm up here, and it's her first time seeing it. So, anyways, there are three classifications that you can actually go under: geography, religion, and ethnic backgrounds. Now, the thing I found interesting as a practicing necromancer is how much the world doesn't know about the procedures of death. For an example, cremation. Okay. In Judaism, it's not acceptable, but some sects feel it's okay because the soul belongs to God. In Buddhism and Hinduism, they believe the body should be cremated. So you get two different perspectives of it. The embalming methods, the United States and Canada want it to be Muslim, Baha'i, but was it Baha'i? I think it's how it's pronounced. Orthodox Jewish, they forbid it. Hinduism and Buddhism, they have no need for these types of procedures, such as cremation, because they believe in enlightenment and knowledge, the soul's transcendence, of either through good or evil, if you will. The ritual wash, okay, and here in America, when a corpse goes to the the hospital, because they always take them to the morgue. The morgue tech doesn't just do an autopsy. They don't just embalm the body like they used to with chemicals and stuff like that, but they try to root out the cause of death, like cardiac arrest or a stroke. The Black Widow effect of a heart attack. As cardiac arrest is, and so when they've cut open the body, they always wash the body as they inspect it. So if the police, for an example, are called to a location and they find a body, they have to do a an investigation, okay, to determine the cause of death. Is it how should I say this? Is it foul play or was it natural? Okay, and unfortunately, this also goes underneath anthropology. Anthropology, there are four main characteristics of death and dying, from cultural to linguistics to um, ethnic backgrounds, even through practices themselves. So I thought that was very interesting to see through an anthropology perspective because it's all scientific based. I mean, they could tell just by measuring um, a body, a bone such as a skull, if it was male, female, child, adult. They can even tell you just by the coloration: has it been buried? Has it been in a furnace, so to speak? Has it been buried? Is it something that was bought or purchased for like medical students, if you will? Hell, I mean, you can go to any legalized corporation and buy human remains. Okay, and these are normally bleached through acid, so they're bleached white. And if they've been buried for like a decade or two, then they have a kind of a brownish color to it, like a tint. But then if they've been, say for an example, cremated, they show kind of a white and charcoal gray type tint to it. And if there's been any foul play, then you see dings and dents and holes in the skull. And that's just to kind of give you a brief summary of how an anthropologist can determine this stuff. And I found this interesting because my studies into necromancy actually began with thanatology, not just the historical account of the practices of necromancy. And like most individuals, it took me into Greek and Roman necromancy until I found the Shem priesthood, and it took off from there. So, I mean, the ritual wash was basically to cleanse the impurities from the body, and that was kind of cool. And I mean, even if you're dealing with the death of an individual, funeral homes in the United States are the ones that literally will either work with the loved ones, the family, and or they'll take care of all the plans and arrangements for you. That's basically why they charge so much. I mean, an average plot and burial session costs roughly around 4 grand. You're talking $4,000, if not more, because you got to take into consideration the coffin, the plot, the amount of people involved. You got the sessions such as the wake, the burial, and the the mourning procedures. You know, you got all of this stuff to play into effect. So you're looking at easily 4 grand, if not more. The the New Orleans jazz, for an example, if you actually watch what happens, much like in a wedding, these people, this particular community of Creole, they they really enjoy their celebrations. They'll celebrate life as easily as they celebrate death. For an example, have you ever been in the French Quarter down there? And they always have these parades where you get a group of people carrying a coffin. They're dressed up. They're utilizing how should I say this, effigies, if you will, such as Baron Samedi or the Loa of the Dead, because that's one of the most uh, how should I say this, voodoo type community there is here in the United States. Now, what's ironic here is they bury their dead above ground, and the reason for that is because of the fact that a mausoleum setting is the best way to bury the dead in New Orleans, or even in Louisiana in general, because of the fact that it's all marshland, it's all water under there. So that's why they get so many floods during hurricane seasons and everything. So, and even then, even if they did bury them below ground, the water would just force the coffin right up, and it's kind of cool. I mean, a um, a ritual would be that if you pray for a human bone, let's say a femur or a skull or whatever, one of the things about that is the ground and earth will bring these bones to the surface, especially if they've been there for about let's say, for example, 100 years or two. The hanging coffins. Now, this one, whew, imagine the work that's got to go into this one. And this is Philippine based. The Philippines have a unique way of burying their dead. And what they do is they drag the coffins or carry the coffins to a cliff. They hoist the coffin up the side of that cliff, and that's where they leave them. That's where they leave them. Very interesting. And the reason for that is because of the scavengers. But also, it's interesting to try to pinpoint why do they do that? What's the purpose behind that? I mean, even the sky burials of Tibet kind of symbolize this. So, if you think about, there is a spider web, all things need to eat. But at the same time, like I said, something has to be destroyed to be created. Someone has to die for someone to live. It's the natural order of things, right? Unless you become a lick, a necromancer and literally remove yourself from that natural flow and become something unnatural. So basically, the hanging coffins are a lot like the sky burials. And this is where 80% of Tibetan peoples would take the dead up to a top of the mountain to feed the birds, if you will, and other animals. Very, very impressive. Very impressive to see. And I mean, you can actually Google these things. Each one of these things you can actually Google and do an extensive research and the procedures of it, how the bodies are taken care of, how they're either placed in a sarcophagi or a coffin or a cave, a temple, a tomb, and it's very interesting to watch and to see how these things play out. South Korea, this particular rite was kind of interesting because you think more when you start learning about the death and the burial aspects of necromantic rites and stuff. You think voodoo, you think satanic, death rites. You think brujeria, Santeria, Palo, even Palo more than anything. Because if you think about Palo Mayumbi, they are known as the people with sticks, and they utilize bones of both human and animal alike. Can be seen in Cuban, um, the Congo region, um, even in South America, Central America, and North America practices. Very impressive. So when you think of this particular set of rituals, that's what you would think. But no, in South Korea, the dead were cremated and and pressed into beads. Beads. Okay, like mala, for an example. Incredible. But they press the ashes into these beads and everything, and then they place them into um, urns and vases and containers, bottles even, and it's for storage. Very interesting. Who would have thought that a culture, modern culture, that fears death and all these laws throughout the world to where you have to respect the dead, the body and everything of a former or being. For an example, here in the US, to do anything with a cadaver is illegal unless you have a medical license to, like, say, a mortician or a transporter or whatever. Somebody that works for a corporation that can handle say, for an example, the bleaching of the bones and removing of the flesh and bacteria. So in this case, you have laws against the defilement of a corpse. You have all these rights where you can't do nothing with a graveyard or um, to the body itself. But yet, cannibalism is still legal in the United States. Cannibalism. You can eat a human being, and it's legal. Who would have fucking thought, right? So yeah, that one I found was kind of interesting. South Korea, very interesting. The turning of the bones. The turning of the bones. Madagascar. Madagascar is one of the most spiritual, influential peoples in Africa, in the world, really, outside of Israel, in the Middle East. But when you think about this, every 5 to 7 years, even 6 to 7 years, they would go into a tomb or into a mausoleum or into the graveyard. They would literally dig up the remains. They would wash the how should I say this? They would they would take the body or the remains out of the grave, redress them, redress them. It would be like taking your great great grandparent out of his tomb, out of his coffin, taking him out of his article of clothing, redressing him in new modern wear, turning the body upside down, face down, and then reburying the body and or into the crypt itself. And that was something that I found very interesting because a lot of times when you think voodoo, such as Ghana, Ethiopia, Malawi, um, even Congo region practices. Madagascar is perhaps one of the most unique when it comes to burial, not just South Korea in that case. It's very interesting. And then you have the fantasy coffin. The fantasy coffin. Now, this one again, you're thinking symbolically, symbolically, because symbolically speaking, in a spiritual practice, a religion, when you sign someone's death warrant through a curse, a hex, or you know, a wrathful or baneful sorcery type practice, you would utilize sympathy magic. You would use a symbolic meaning of that person's demise. A lot of times it would be blood, it would be a photo of somebody that's died tragically. But in this case, in Ghana, they would actually utilize a sculpture of a coffin. Now, these coffins are painted as animals, objects, vessels, etc., to depict the deceased character, the character of the individual. I thought that was pretty cool because you don't really see where people literally dig up the bodies. I mean, you've heard of legally speaking here in the U.S. You've had people where the FBI have raided botanicas and found human remains in a ganga, a prenda. You don't hear much about you know destruction or desecration of a final resting place within voodoo, Satanism, even. But you do see the funerary rites within pagan, Wiccan, and satanic traditions. Even in Christian mythology, theurgy, even they had a unique perspective. Pyromancy. Vikings would place the dead on a raft, send it or a ship, and send it out into a river or a lake, and then just shoot an arrow towards it. The Amazons would set up a pyro type display, kind of like a pyramid with a corpse in the center, and just light it, a type of cremation. The Shem priesthood of Africa, they would do all of the above. They would do the organ removal of four main organs. They would wash the body, the ritual wash. They would mummify as they went along. They would remove the brain because to them they didn't see the brain as something that the individual would need. But the one thing that I've noticed is that you're seeing a cave, you're seeing a morgue, like a mausoleum. You're seeing urns. You're seeing symbolatry of death throughout history. And it's not just in these areas that I just named off. You can go anywhere in the world and they're going to have their own unique perspective on death. For an example, when somebody is buried in Europe, they have a tradition where they would take a horse and go over the graves. It was so often. And if the horse refused to go over a grave, then that person must be a vampiro, a vampire. Very interesting. Romanian history is equally as impressive. Balkans, Hungarians, Slovakians, Slavic, death and dying. You know, all of these rich with knowledge of death, history of death and dying. So, I mean, when I first became a necromancer, I delved into thanatology. I delved into what necromancy was. I got into the different perspectives of it, and I started learning the different tools and the different traditions that were associated with that. And here I am, 6 years later, as a practicing necromancer, full time, and I've written 7 essays, two of which 4 and 5 I put together because they kind of fit together. So in reality, I actually wrote about 6 essays. And I'm working on another essay right now, and I'm still going, and it's only been 6 years. 6 years since I got into necromancy full time and left Satanism behind. So just because one chapter closes doesn't mean that you're done learning. I want you to think about your tradition wherever you are in the world. Think about how it affects you, how it what are the practices surrounding your burial. I mean, are you going to utilize the sin offerings, for an example, out of the Bible? Are you going to use the practices of the sin eater? I mean, the sin eater. Now that was a folkloric tradition that was interesting. I mean, you can go to a Catholic minister and go, hey, I'm dying. I'm on my deathbed. I want my sins to be removed. And of course, they'll, upon confession and hearing of your confession, they anoint you and go, hey, guess what? You're sin free. Go on to the next world. But 17th, 18th, and early 19th century, the sin eater, this was somebody that would go into a person's home and they would eat the Last Supper. I know it's symbolically of Christ and the disciples, but in this tradition, it was believed that by eating the Last Supper, this would resolve whatever sins the person had done throughout his or her life, and they would absorb those sins through that meal. Very interesting. Very interesting. They would mummify them, wrap them in cloths, find linens, bury them in caves, tombs, flat bonfires. Pyromancy. They would so many different techniques, and I feel like you're just scratching the surface. Just scratching the surface. Even if you're working with the Natos, the personification of death, you're working with Samael, the venom of God, or whatever. I mean, even if you're studying poisons, you're studying herbalism, you're studying um, different methods of warfare and how to torture and kill. It doesn't matter. This is stuff that has been around for hundreds of thousands of years, and every culture has been affected by it. finding that truth, seeking that truth. That is something that's interesting. But I find it interesting and fascinating to learn about this stuff that you don't see today. So I just wanted to drop that gnosis on you. All right. Whatever you preach, always back it up with numerous sources and always make yourself available to the public. You are responsible for the things you do and say. You not only do you answer to the public, but you also answer to the spirits that you have aligned yourself with. It is your responsibility to represent those spirits, and it is your responsibility to act in accordance with the laws of the land, but also with being an elder, especially if you're a minister. All right? Always back it up. Keep those horns up. Keep on striving for knowledge. Keep on going. All right? Have a good one.